The interior of Lupercalia was vast and ornate. Commissar Gallus and Ogg had never been to Terra, but Inquisitor Torix and Sergeant Lazarus had spent time in the Imperial Palace. The similarities were quite eerie. Both were monuments. One, a monument to the hopes and dreams of mankind. But here, instead of a monument to past glories, this place was a monument to eternal penitence. All of the depictions of the Emperor's traitorous sons were gilded or painted over to depict grand tableaus dedicated to warning of their hubris. How beings so great and powerful could still succumb to temptation. In place of mosaics of the Emperor gloriously leading the crusade, there were stylized depictions of demons and traitor marines tormenting mankind.
Those are some scary pictures.
Keep your mind focused on the Emperor's will, Bonehead Ogg.
Yes, sir, Mr. Marine, sir. Protect the special thingy.
The maglift should be this way. Torix gestured down the hallway. As he did so, they could hear claws scrabbling against the great door they had just passed through, punctuated by loud bangs as something was slamming itself against it. We must hurry. We must be aboard the maglift before they break through. We cannot get bogged down in a firefight here. The Ogryns and the Space Marines moved double time down the broad corridor with its high vaulted ceilings. If they wanted to, the entire force could have stood shoulder to shoulder and still not been able to touch the opposite wall. Their heavy footfalls echoed through the cavernous edifice. As they marched, a group of humanoid figures appeared from behind a number of the great pillars up ahead. The Lamenters leveled their weapons, preparing for combat. They suspected gene-stealer cultists, but they held their fire when they drew closer. The figures all wore black robes, and many of them were misshapen with hunched forms. One, who appeared to be their leader, stood a bit straighter and carried a staff of office bearing the imperial aquila, though the two heads of the eagle were covered in a black shroud. He stepped forward and removed his hood. He bore implants around his mouth, eyes, the base of his skull, and his neck. The implants appeared to be similar to those utilized by the Sisters Repentia, who sought forgiveness in the eyes of the Emperor as they used neurostimulators to attempt to purge their sin by suffering in the Emperor's name, a physical reminder of the sins burdening their souls. "Greetings, my lords." The penitent's manner and movements were graceful and formal, but all of the muscles in his face and arms were taut and twitching. "If you wish to talk, walk in front of us where we can see you all. We cannot be delayed in our purpose." The leader nodded to his subordinates, and they all began shuffling ahead of the Ogryns and Marines, carrying their ornately patterned weapons. Most carried las weapons. A few carried plasma rifles. "It is not my intent to delay you, my lords. I am Oblatus Multatio, and I lead these brothers of eternal penitence."
Are you criminals? Traitors sent here to repent for the ills you have done.
"Yes. We are the descendants of the few chapter serfs that served the traitor legions during the heresy. The vast majority of our kind were lost to the ancient enemies, their souls forever lost. Upon seeing the ruination of Molech and the entire Imperium, we have taken on the sins of our forefathers, so that one day the foul taint of the great betrayal may one day be lifted from mankind." "And? Are you offering your services?" "We offer our services to the sons of Sanguinius, the blessed angel. Not to you, Inquisitor." Inquisitor Torix looked as if he'd very much liked to be annoyed, but he simply didn't have time to care. Sergeant Lazarus quickly took command.
Very well. 2 things. 1. Do you know the status of the city? How far have the Xenos reached? 2. The enemy is not far behind us. They will likely break through the great gate that we just came through. We will need you to delay them as much as possible. We must reach our target.
"I am not sure. There's been a communication blackout for days. We were pushed back farther into the city, fighting ferociously room to room. About 10 hours ago, many of the bioforms withdrew, and we stopped dealing with a mass incursion. Now we've been hunted by the lurking creatures the swarm left behind. As far as aiding you in this matter, it is with great regret that I may only give my life once for the Emperor. I shall gather what brothers I can, and we shall hold them off for as long as we are able. Perhaps then we shall know the Emperor's peace. The brothers of eternal repentance took their positions around the pillar, and a few left, presumably to gather more forces. Ogg looked back to the hooded figures, and he gave a bit of a smile. Those men were trying to make up for all the bad stuff that happened in all the scary drawings. Now, they were going to see the Emperor. Ogg hoped Biff and Fletcher were doing okay, and they found their way to the Emperor's house. Eventually, they reached the industrial mag lift. Even for a machine that was typically designed only for utility, the heavy gold-plated doors were covered with ornate etchings of the nightmare of the Horus Heresy. Stylized mutilated corpses, skulls, and fire adorned it. Inquisitor Torix quickly entered another access code, but it failed to comply. A tech priest and his retinue came forth to calm the machine spirit and burn holy incense and apply the sacred blessed oils to soothe and lift it into compliance. As the ritual went on, they could hear the crack of Laz fire behind them. The brothers were causing the delay. The Marines and Ogryns had the strength to withstand most of what the swarm could throw at them, but they couldn't afford to get bogged down in an extended fight. Gallus looked from the tech priest to the sounds of battle behind them. He could hear the piercing shrieks of the Tyranids as combat ensued. As it continued, he could hear the rate of fire begin to slow. Eventually the Laz guns fell silent. It was at that moment that the tech priest finally finished his final benediction, and the machine spirit saw fit to obey and open its doors so the Ogryns and Space Marines could enter. Inquisitor Torix placed something on the control panel of the maglift before entering it himself. Ogg felt his tummy rise a little bit as the maglift whizzed down into the depths of Lupercalia. The trip was not very long, and this ancient machine still worked smoothly, and appeared to be well maintained by whatever Mechanicus presence was in this place. The doors slid open to a much darker hallway than the one they left. There was no stained glass here, no cathedral-like architecture. This place felt more like a catacombs. The air was stale, and there were no lights to speak of. "Ogryns, turn on your auspex." The Ogryns pressed the button on the side of their helmets, and the nearly pitch-black hallway that was only lit by the occasional glow of an incense stick became a sea of green, outlining all the objects in their way. Ogg stepped out.
Look out for the sneaky bad bugs. Don't let them get you. Stay together.
The Ogryns led with their heavy slab shields in front and moved through the catacombs. As they walked, the air seemed to close in on them. Never had anything been so quiet. Ogg was comforted by the sound of all the heavy footfalls around him. It meant that he was with his friends, and as long as he had his friends, nothing bad could happen. The Ogryns and the Space Marines marched for what felt like hours, hearing nothing, seeing nothing. The only thing to look at was the endless lines of remains that were interred down here. Repentant brothers, sisters, dozens, hundreds, possibly even thousands of different penitent orders buried their dead down here. Their bones were on display behind heavy transparent screens like glass. Others were sealed in heavy stone sarcophagi. As they marched, they made a few turns. Ogg tried to remember where they had been, but he quickly became lost as everything in this place looked so similar. Sergeant Lazarus held up his fist suddenly. Something didn't feel right. Ogg wasn't sure why they had to stop, but he held up his shield and turned on his power maul. The other Ogryns followed his lead.
Forgive me, brothers and sisters. I pray this does not disturb your rest.
With that, Sergeant Lazarus fired his storm bolter into a nearby stone sarcophagus. The thing shattered, revealing a flailing bioform inside with great mantis-like claws. A lictor. It was quickly pulped under the marine's fire. There was a moment of pause. Then the creatures began slinking out of the nooks and crannies of the catacomb, lictors and gene-stealers. They leapt out of their hiding places. Chuck, a hefty bullgrin, was swarmed by 3 gene-stealers as they leapt out from one of the glass cases above. They grasped and clawed at the Ogryn, ripping through his carapace armor as he lashed out at them. He managed to club one in the head as the other 2 found his throat and slit it wide open. A lictor slithered out and clung to the ceiling. Anaximenes, a younger lamenter, lashed out with his lightning claws, but this wily creature was too quick. With one swift motion, the creature neatly pierced through the marine's ocular sensors and drove its claw straight through the marine's brain, dropping him in one stroke. The fighting became fierce. Some of the creatures managed to get the drop on the troops, but others were unable to overcome the sheer size and power of the Ogryns and the even more formidable Terminators. To Ogg, it was just confusing and chaotic. He was swinging his power maul at the scurrying bioforms as fast as he could. One slashed across his belly, biting deep into his armor, but Ogg was able to push back with his shield and crush it into the stone wall. Ogg heard the sound of something behind him. He tried to turn around to face the lictor that now lunged at him. Ogg flinched as he saw the creature's head explode. He looked over to see Gallus's smoking bolt pistol. "Keep the lads in order, Ogg. Let's crush these Xenos." Ogg leapt back into the fight, smashing the bad bugs and getting his brother Ogryn back on their feet. After the initial ambush, things began to turn in favor of the Imperials. As much as there were places to hide, places for these creatures to leap out from, there were no places to run, no ducks to slip away into. A few of the bioforms managed to disengage and flee from the Bullgryns and Terminators, but most were shredded by lightning claws or smashed by power mauls. The fighting ended as soon as it started. The bodies of Chuck and Anaximenes were placed in a couple of empty sarcophagi and closed. They simply didn't have time to deal with the dead properly. Hopefully the Tyranids wouldn't find or defile the bodies, but there was simply nothing else to do. They simply couldn't afford to lug corpses around, and burning in such a confined, poorly ventilated space might just eat up all the oxygen in the area. The march continued. There were a few more skirmishes. Mostly, the group would find a few more creatures lying in wait, but they were much more prepared to deal with them this time. There were no more deaths or major injuries. A few Ogryn bore a few nasty slashes, but their thick skin and hearty constitution kept them on their feet and fighting. After a while, the hallway widened and the air flowed a bit more freely. The high, arching ceilings returned as well. This portion of the underground seemed even more ancient. There was an odd kind of sanctity, a sacredness that permeated the area. "This is it." Torix gestured to the intersection they had arrived in. "This is where we must make our stand." No man do they call me. My mother and my father, and all my comrades as well. Thank you all for watching the latest episode of Ogg the Ogryn. If you liked what you listened to, please leave a like and comment below, as it helps with my efforts to keep you all entertained. If you are new to the channel, please consider subscribing so you can keep up with the serial stories that I post each weekday. If you're confused, you can click on the playlist and start Ogg's story from the beginning. And if you would like to help me out financially, I would appreciate any support you can offer through Patreon or PayPal if you wish to donate. Thank you all very much. No Man out.